This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
I'm the victim in this entire situation. Like, I wanted to know forever, and I feel like it's kind of like all the adults in my life kind of, I don't know, it's all of their decisions that have led up to where we are at this point.
Imagine spitting into a tube, sending off your DNA, and unknowingly turning your life upside down. For me and thousands of others, this is our reality. I'm your host, Alexis Auerselt. In July of 2021, I discovered that I am an NPE, someone who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. This podcast shares the journeys of people who were shocked by a DNA discovery, mostly through modern DNA testing. We're telling the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. This is DNA Surprises. DNA surprises are often bittersweet. The results we receive via consumer DNA testing can lead to upset and confusion, but they can also answer long-held questions and lay the foundation for new relationships. In this week's episode, Bonnie shares how she always knew that she didn't know her father. But once she started searching, she found answers she didn't expect. Her journey to identifying her biological father includes many twists and turns. She shares how she was able to track down her bio dad with the support of a search angel, and how her discovery has affected her relationship with her mother. Thank you for sharing your story, Bonnie.
My name's Bonnie, and I'm 29, and, well, I was born in Perth, Australia, but I grew up in New Zealand. I'm a New Zealand citizen, but I am living in Australia again, but I'm from New Zealand. From listening to a lot of the other stories, I felt like mine was in some ways different because I never knew who my biological father. I always knew that I didn't know him. And growing up, my mum, I didn't have any other father figure. Mum had mum had various boyfriends, but essentially mum was a single mum, and I just didn't know who my dad was. So when I was little, I do remember having some times where, there was one girl who made fun of me at school because I didn't have a dad, and I was a bit upset about it. And mum was like, "No, you do have a dad. Mm-hmm. Everyone has a dad. You have a mum and a dad to make a baby. So you have one. And if anyone asks, just say his name is Peter." And she was like, "His name's Peter." And that was that, really.
Did you ask a lot of questions? Were you curious about who your biological father was?
Yes and no. I think it didn't come up too much. I remember being at school, sometimes they'd be like, "Oh, what's your mum and dad's name?" And you'd have to write down their names or whatever. And I'd always feel a bit really uncomfortable. And I'd kind of just be like, "Oh, Peter." I don't remember as a young child asking mum much about it. There was one boyfriend that she had long term. There was one point where, because mum encouraged me to ask him if he was okay with me calling him dad on Father's Day. So it was kind of like he was the closest to, I wouldn't consider him a father figure, but he was probably mum's longest boyfriend that she had. And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And then on Father's Day, I woke up and I was so excited because I never had anyone to say Happy Father's Day to. I think I would have been like 7 or 8. And I ran out. I heard him get up in the morning to get up, I guess, to go to the bathroom. And he walked out into the hallway, and I came running out of my bedroom. And I was like, Happy Father's Day, Dad. And he was like, oh, it's too early. And turned around and went into the bathroom. So I know it came up. I know that it was something I thought about, but overall, not too much. There's just like a few points, a few memories until I was about 15 or 16. That's when it kind of kicked up a notch in terms of wanting to know about him.
Mm-hmm. Did your mom ever give you background about what happened or who she thought he was or where he was at that point?
I don't recall her ever giving much information, except that statement I think she said about him being sailing around the world, which ties in. But when I was about 15, seemingly out of the blue, Mum was like, oh, I actually have to tell you something. Peter might not be your dad. So I don't remember it as well if I knew this man Peter could be the person or if it was just the name, just a brand, tell people that it's Peter. But I kind of always just thought, oh yeah, my dad's name's Peter. But when I got to about 15, she was like, oh, I have to tell you something. His name actually might not be Peter. There were actually a few different people who it could have been. And that's when she kind of went into a little bit more about it. So she was like, well, I was actually dating this guy, my ex-boyfriend, and his name was Steve. And they had broken up about a month before I would have been conceived. Well, what she thought. She broke up. It was also her birthday month. And it happened to be this big Navy event happening in the city that she was living in, which is in... So there were lots of Navy people from the Australian Navy, the US Navy, all there doing these big naval games. And it was her birthday month and she just broken up with her boyfriend and she was 21. So as you can imagine, she went wild.
Right, yeah.
Had a good time as you do. There were actually 4 people who it could have been.
Okay.
And she always excluded this guy, Steve, who was her ex-boyfriend, because she thought the timing didn't match up quite right. And she was like, and I really didn't want it to be him. I just really didn't want him to be your dad. And I look a lot like my mum. So it was really hard to tell when I was born who I looked like. So she just worked it out. Okay, it can't be Steve. So there were 4 people. It could have also been another friend of hers, but he actually did a paternity test when I was a baby, which I wasn't aware of, and it came back negative. And then the other man was actually an African-American man from the US Navy. And she was like, and when you came out, Mum's background is Scottish, Irish, just all the way back. And I came out ginger. She just was like, I'm pretty sure you're most likely not part African-American. So that left this mystery, this Peter guy who she had had a fling with. He was in the Australian Navy over a weekend or 2 while that was happening. So, but anyway, she was like, oh my gosh, I've realized now you look just like Steve.
So once you became a teenager, she saw more of a resemblance there.
Yeah. And she was like, oh, I can't believe I didn't see it before. You look so much like Steve. You even your sense of humor is like Steve's. So many things. She was like, Steve must be your dad. It was meant to be a secret. She wasn't meant to tell me. She had been in cahoots with Steve's mother, so my alleged grandmother, and my mum's mother. They actually came to visit, not Steve, but my potential grandmother came to visit me, which was a 5-hour drive with my grandmother under the pretense that she was a friend of my grandmother's. And she brought photos of her family and of her son who was, I wasn't meant to know who she was, but Mum told me. It was really weird. And so that's when I started kind of thinking about it more. And we were going to do a DNA test, but it got really messy. Mum had told Steve when I was a baby, no, she's not yours. And so he knew of me, just thought I wasn't his. And he now had a family, 2 kids, wife. And once he found out that I could be his, Mum got a phone call from him. He got kicked out of the house, apparently. It was this big thing.
Even though it predated his new family?
Yeah. Which I don't understand. I feel like if my partner found out, you know, years down the line that he had a kid that he didn't know about, I feel like I'd want to be welcoming. Like it's not that kid's fault. I don't know. And also for predated me.
Was your mom, when she disclosed this to you, what was her vibe? Was it matter of fact? Was she embarrassed? How was that conversation?
I think she has a lot of shame. I think she feels a lot of shame around the whole situation. It was fairly matter of fact. Mum's she's fairly honest as a person, most overall. Like we've got a lot of issues and stuff in our relationship, but yeah, she was just like, I just didn't know. And I thought, you know, but her story changes a little bit as well, which is why it's kind of confusing. So she's honest, but I think it's almost like her memory just changes a little bit over time.
Okay. So she discloses to you that she isn't 100% sure who your biological father is, and that it might not be Peter, but it could be Steve when you're about 15 and you met his mother, and that's kind of what started your curiosity. But then due to family drama, you were never actually able to confirm?
No, not at that time. So Mum actually called the whole thing off because she was just like, well, because he called her and there was like yelling on the phone, and it was just, Mum's quite a turbulent, loud person. So she's never shy to have a fight with someone and yell. And so it was like lots of yelling. And I was just standing in the room while I could hear Mum yelling on the phone to someone. And then she got a phone. She's like, no, we're not doing it. This is it. Like, you don't really need to know, do you? Like, you know, you've got lots of family who love you already, and we're pretty sure it's Steve. Like, you don't really need to know for sure, do you? Like, and it wasn't really something I could really argue with. So I was like, oh no, I know you love me. And at that point I was 15, and the DNA test that they were going to do, Mum completely was like, no, don't want to do it. From then on, I kind of just was like, okay, well, I guess my dad's name is Steve. And I knew he had kids, and I was friends with his mother on Facebook for a couple years. So I used to like look at them and stuff on Facebook, but I never had any contact with Steve, and not really any contact with his mother until I was 18 and I moved away from home and went to university. So I actually reached out to her then because I really wanted to have a relationship with that side of my family. I've really felt like I've just didn't know where I came from. Like, obviously I know my mum's side, but something I think I've always kind of just missed is not knowing where I come from. And there's features on my face that don't quite match mum's, but I don't know where mum's features end and this other person's features begin. So I just wanted to know, like, even if Steve didn't want to know me, I was like, well, maybe I'll get to know my grandmother, because she was really lovely and she wanted to be my grandmother. We were in contact for a little while, but then she just stopped responding to me after a little while. And I didn't understand why, because I was like, well, I thought she wanted to know me.
Yeah.
It was really upsetting. It was really upsetting at the time. I think I was like 18, 19, and I went back to Mum and I was like, I don't understand why she's not messaging me anymore. And Mum got in touch with her somehow, and she told my mum that the reason why was because she didn't really want to build a relationship with me unless she knew for sure that I was her granddaughter. And at this point, Steve didn't want to do a test anymore. And so she was like, I don't want to build a relationship unless I know that you're my biological granddaughter. And Steve doesn't want to do a test to know. So like, there wasn't really much to do. So yeah, it was 15 when I first found out, and Mum called off the DNA test. And then when I was an adult at 18, 19, I reached out, and that's when they were like, no, we don't want to do one now. And then so I was just like, okay, basically, I did so much stalking in the most like non-creepy way possible, but pretty creepy. I was like, I really wanted to know about them because my nose is really different to mum's. So I'd like find pictures of them online and I'd be like, is my nose like Steve's nose? And my ears are different to mum's. And are my ears his ears? And I'd look at his kids, and I wrote him lots of letters because I was really angry as well that he knew that he probably had a daughter and didn't want to know anymore. And I was angry at mum as well. I don't know, it just felt unfair.
Yeah.
I just really wanted to know. And I feel like I was talking about it with someone the other day. Like, a lot of people just don't care to know what their biology is. But I just always had this like longing to know.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was just like his brothers, like my uncles and stuff. I was like, I feel like I've got this whole side of me that I have no idea about. And his mother also had breast cancer when she was younger and had both of her breasts removed, which was genetic. So she, even though she didn't want to know me, she did actually, when I was about 21, I was going to get birth control and my doctor was like, oh, do you have breast cancer in the family? I was like, oh, I think so, actually. So I reached out to her and she sent me her medical records, which was nice. But that was the only contact I had until I was 24. And then completely out of the blue, I got a message from his mother one day and was like, hi, Bonnie, Steve wants to do the test now. Will you do a DNA test? So this is like nearly 10 years after I've, first found out about him. He wants to do this DNA test. And of course I was like, yes, yep, definitely. I do want to do the test. The whole thing took about a month. And I got the results back and it was whatever the lowest percent chance, probably 0.00% chance that he's my father.
Wow. What was your reaction when you saw that?
Oh my gosh. I was at work. I don't know why I did this, but I had put my work email as the email where they send the results to. And so it popped up in my inbox, and I share like a little office at the time with one other person, and she knew the whole, like, what was happening. I had been keeping her updated with this whole story. So it was like a reality TV show for her. She was like, oh my gosh, we're going to find out. But I was like, maybe I shouldn't open it. And she was like, no, you have to open it because otherwise you're not going to do any work all day. So I clicked on it and opened it. And as you know, it was negative. And I started welling up, I started tearing up.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe, I could believe it. I knew that it might not be him, but I'd kind of started for like nearly the last 10 years, I'd been like that. This is most likely the person who's my dad.
Right.
And I'd spent obviously a long time looking at him and trying to find out as much information as I could. It almost felt like everything just went silent. And I looked at my coworker and I was like, it's negative. And she was just like, she saw me and she was like, are you okay? And when I started, she just saw my eyes and she was like, go for a walk. So I was like, okay. And I grabbed my car keys and I walked out of the office to go for a walk because I just didn't know what to do. I just felt it was just like a rush of emotion, just everything just kind of just felt like I couldn't believe it.
What did your mom say?
Oh, I actually didn't expect mum to get the results right away because she doesn't really use her emails, and she had selected to get it posted to her. But I guess so I was kind of relieved, but I guess they emailed her anyway, and she happened to check her emails. She called me not long after I'd left the office. So I walked out for this walk and I'd actually just walked to my car and drove home.
Yeah.
I don't even really remember the drive home. I just, that I was at work and then I was in my car and then I was at home, and mum called and she was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that it's not him. I just really thought it was him. And I just was like, I can't even talk about it. I can't talk to you right now. because now I was like, oh my gosh, now it must be this Peter person. And
Right.
who's Peter?
Like, she didn't have any details about where he went because it was a fling.
Yeah, not really. So, and at this point as well, Mum really didn't like me telling people about, my story, because she was like, think about me. You're just thinking all about yourself. Like, you're being really selfish. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. She's like, can we stop looking for him now? Like, I don't want to look for him anymore. Not that she'd actually ever put in any effort into finding him. That infuriated me as well, because then she was like, oh yeah, when I thought it could be Peter, I actually did go to the Navy office to get in touch with him. But they made me fill out paperwork, and it was just like a lot of paperwork. So I didn't do it. I was just like,
wow. So this is what you mean by kind of additional details came out as.
Yeah. She was like, oh yeah, it was just like a lot of, it's a lot of paperwork to go through to get in touch with him. And I was just like, and she didn't want to do it anymore either. And she was like, why don't you think about my feelings? This was, this is not just you. This is like my feelings too. And one thing that breaks my heart, the one thing, like, I know that my mum loves me and cares, and she's a good person. She is just so self-absorbed. Throughout this entire thing, it's always been about, her feelings. And I know that there's a lot of shame there, but like, everyone in my family has always known that I didn't know who my dad was. No one really cares. Like, I don't care. I don't judge that. It's mainly just been how her choices and behavior now as well. Like, it's not really changing. And then, yeah, all this extra detail came out, and she was like, oh, well, yeah, I don't remember his last name anymore. I remember he was in the Navy and there were these Navy games happening. But yeah, she was like, this is all too much for me. I don't want to find out. And she said his last name sounded funny, which that was kind of like my only other clue. So I was like, it's Peter. His last name sounds funny, and he was in the Navy.
So you go some time without any real answers. How did you learn about consumer DNA testing, and did you decide to take it because you were hoping to find Peter?
I think it was one of my family members recommended it, and she had done it just because she's really interested in the family tree and genealogy. I did my DNA in 2019. So between 2017 and 2019, I just had what Mum had given me to go off. So I was looking up, like, in Google, just like Peter, Australian Navy, and Navy games. And I did find, I was looking through newspapers. I found out all the ships that were in the port at the time. Like, I knew every single ship that was there at these events. And I knew where they were going, when they were decommissioned, like, all this information. But like, also, I kind of had to take some of Mum's stuff with a grain of salt, because like, one day I'd be like, oh, what about, she'd be like, oh, maybe Adelaide sounds familiar. And then she'd be like, oh, maybe this city sounds familiar. Maybe he was from Tasmania. Maybe he was from, like, maybe it was this ship. But she had no idea. She was like, so even though she didn't want to find him, over the next like couple of years, like, I would just I would literally send names to her. I'd look through Navy newspapers, and anytime I saw the name Peter, but she was like, yeah, maybe it was double barrels, like, it was like a hyphenated name, or maybe it rhymed with something, or just sounded funny. So I'd just send her names and be like, is it this name? Like, could it be this name? No. And yeah, it just became really, really disheartening. Like, I just never felt like I was getting anywhere, but I was doing so much research, like hours and hours and hours of research. And then in 2019, I decided to do my DNA in Ancestry and 23andMe. I did both at the same time because I was hoping to find some match. So that's why I decided to do it, because I felt like I was at the end of what I could really get.
2019, you take the test, but you don't get any immediate results. Do you match with any family from your bio dad's side?
No close results. So a little bit of background as well, intergenerational trauma. Mum doesn't know her dad. So, she knew of him. She knew his name. But she actually had a true NPE experience, I think when she was like 4 or 5. So her mother got pregnant with her, unmarried. So she quickly got married to another man. And I think he knew that he wasn't her dad, but mum didn't know. When they later divorced, when she was about 4 or 5, and she then didn't get to see her dad anymore, she didn't understand because, why wasn't he coming to see her? And my grandmother, so her mum, was like, well, he's actually not your dad. Your dad's this other person. Really awful for mum when she was a little girl because she didn't understand. But Nanny knew who he was. So mum had his name, knew a little bit about the family, but then he also died quite young. So she never got to know her dad. But with my DNA matches, because I didn't know much about mum's dad's side and I had nothing about my dad's side, it was really hard to figure out, except for mum's maternal side, who was on my father's side and who was mum's dad's side. But yeah, no, I had no one close except a cousin of mum's father in 2019. But yeah, this year, so it would have been about 2.5 to 3 months ago, I got really into looking again. And I'd every few months, basically over the last few years, I've intensely researched and then kind of burnt out because it's quite emotionally draining.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Actually got a message from mum's dad's cousin, the one that I'd matched with right at the beginning. And she was like, hey, do you want to catch up and do a FaceTime and talk? We've never actually done that in the 3 years that I've been on the DNA website. So that kind of triggered me to start getting into it again. And we talked, and she gave me lots of information about mum's dad's side. I was able to build that side of my tree, which helped separate all of my maternal matches and all of my paternal matches. Basically, at that point, I was able to kind of figure out who was on which side, but I still didn't have any close matches. So I put my DNA, and I had already put my DNA into GEDmatch, and I hadn't really got anything there. I uploaded on a whim my DNA into MyHeritage, and I didn't really expect to get anyone there. I'd never heard of MyHeritage before, and I was like, well, I'm on the 2 biggest databases. How am I going to get anyone closer on a smaller database?
Yeah.
Put my DNA file on there, and then after a week of processing, I got a message. It was like, your DNA's done. And I logged in, and I had a close match. Well, the closest match I'd ever had, which was about 465 centimorgans. And I could tell pretty much right away they weren't on mum's side. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person must be. And he was in his 70s, like a 70-year-old man, 465 centimorgans. And I was like, how is this person related to me?
Yeah, I haven't used MyHeritage. Does it show like what the estimate would be, like if it's an uncle or grandfather or?
Yeah, yep, it does. And I think it said, was it first cousin once removed? But yeah, it was like fairly close-ish. We probably have to go back a couple, like only 1 to 2 generations to find out our shared ancestor. So yeah, it says great uncle or first cousin once removed to first cousin twice removed.
Okay.
And to put it into perspective as well, my mum's first cousin on my mum's side shares only 360 something centimorgans with me. So I was like, this person's more closely related than my mum's first cousin that I've obviously grown up with it just kind of felt weird that I've got this like closer genetic match to someone I don't even know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I messaged him. It was managed by his wife. And I still actually to this day haven't heard back. But I Googled him and had his first and last name. And I Googled him, and he actually happened to be fairly high profile. He had a lot of information about him online. He owned like this business. So I was able to find lots of information about him. And I built his entire family tree trying to figure out how I was connected to him. So I was going through obituaries and death notices and to try and find all of the living people to figure out where I connected in this tree. And I did that pretty much any moment I had free for about 2 or 3 weeks. I was just like, I'm so close. I must be able to figure this out. But I couldn't figure it out, which was really frustrating. But I ended up going on DNA Detectives, the Facebook page, and the Down Under one, and asked for help. And I was like, this is all the things I've done. I've made leads charts. I feel like I know so much about genealogy and DNA.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like pretty much everyone in this like NPE community knows just far more about DNA than anyone. I felt like it made my brain like it was just so much for my brain, and I just still couldn't wrap my head around it. So I made this post, and someone reached out to me. And she was like, hey, I think I can probably help you with this. I actually found the father of someone, and she was the product of a one-night stand in a pub. So I think I could probably help. So I gave her access to all of my matches, and I even gave her my login details to MyHeritage because that was where my closest match was. And this all happened on a Sunday. I gave her my access on Sunday night, and then Monday morning, I woke up and she'd messaged me and she was like, what did you say his name was again? I was like, Peter, I think. And she was like, yep, I'm pretty sure I found your guy. So,
wow.
Yeah, overnight in less than 12 hours.
Wow. When you found him and saw who he might be, what did you think?
It was very overwhelming. It's been such a surreal time. I was a bit nervous because so she'd already, by the time she'd found him and I'd woken up and she'd messaged me, she had already found like his entire family on Facebook and had links. And she was like, yep, here's your grandfather. He's still alive. Here's your grandfather. I think you look like him. And here's your uncles and here's your cousins. And this is your dad. And she was like, I think I can see a family resemblance. And you really could. Like, I didn't look just like him, but instantly I knew. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. I can see a resemblance. It was really, really surreal. I felt like I couldn't believe it, that after all this time, finally found who this person was and kind of, going off track, thinking it's this other person. And then now it's back to Peter. From what we could see on his public page on Facebook, it looked like he'd had a Navy career or a military career. He really liked guns, very pro guns. Hunting and fishing were his 2 top likes on his page. And I'm vegan, and I've been I've been heavily into the animal rights stuff in the past, and I was just like, oh my God, all of his photos with dead animals, and I was like, oh my God.
That is a wild experience.
It was really weird. I just kind of was like, oh my God, how it just kind of felt just ironic, really. But he kind of didn't seem super approachable from his public page. I didn't know how I'd relate with him. I felt really nervous. But in terms of looking at all of their faces and stuff, I was like, wow, I feel like this is my family.
What happened next?
I sat on it for a day, and my search angel, who I feel like is just an angel on earth, she's been so amazing. Not only did she find my father, but she effectively coached me through it. She kind of advocated for me. And she offered to reach out on my behalf to his family. And we decided to reach out to one of his brothers because we weren't really sure. I don't know. It just kind of felt like a bit scary going to this person who we didn't really know what he was like, and he kind of seemed a bit rough around the edges. We thought maybe it's better coming from another family member. So we picked the person who we thought would be like the most. We were looking through them. We're like, oh, well, this brother has got like a family. He seems like the family guy, and he also lives kind of close by from what we can see. They had a lot of public information actually on their Facebook. It's just such a weird situation. How do you contact your family that you've never known for the first time?
Yeah.
It's going to be a shock because he had no idea. So we picked his brother, one of his brothers. My search angel reached out to them and explained the situation. And then apparently he was a bit skeptical at first, but once she explained it, and with the little bit of background that we had on this person who was supposedly my father, it matched up with what he knew. And she also sent a photo of me, and apparently he was like, oh, she's got the same hair as our mother. So that was kind of like the thing that stood out to him, that my hair was the same as their mother's, which was really nice. He spoke with his brother a few days later, my father, a few days later. He reached out to me. So he found out a few days after. He messaged me and was like, hi, on Facebook with like the waving emoji. Hi, really happy to hear about you. He's been lovely. And he called me and we had this conversation. And yeah, he was shocked to say the least. But really happy to find out about me. And I don't think he really needed too much convincing once he had the information. It seemed to match up with what he remembered.
Okay.
It's all been really positive. It's just been really, really overwhelming the last few weeks. His entire family have reached out to me, almost every single one of them. Welcome, we love family and your family now too. It just kind of it feels so surreal knowing.
Yeah. Have you talked about meeting in person?
Yeah, we've actually been talking about it this week. He lives in another city in Australia, and I've been talking to him about maybe flying up to meet him, and he's really interested in that as well. It's been a little bit awkward because we don't really know what to talk about. But and that's what the search angel, Tanya, she, right at the beginning, she was like, just treat it like you're dating someone. Just, you don't always like your family, right? So she was like, just keep it light. Talk about easy things to start off with. So I've been taking her advice and we just talk about lots of just random things. But it's a little bit awkward. But it's positive. He was so happy to find out. And he actually had this really weird, so he works in a mine, and the day that he found out about me, so before he'd found out, he was down 1 kilometre deep in a nickel mine operating a machine that he should operate remotely for safety reasons. And he was operating it manually, which was against the rules. You're not allowed to do that, but he did anyway. And the reason why is because it can bring down lots of rock. And that's what happened. And he had essentially this near death experience. He was totally okay, but it was really close. It destroyed the machine from what I understand. And he got up and then he got a phone call from his brother and was like, hey, do you know you've got a 28-year-old daughter?
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So he had a really big day.
Yeah. Have you learned anything about him or your family that has made things kind of make sense? I know you talked about your hair, but you also said that he's a hunter, gun enthusiast, and you're vegan. So have there been any connections? There
have been connections. So despite being a hunter and all of that, they're all, from what I've talked to them all about, they're all really big animal lovers, all grown up with lots of animals. I've always been big animal lover myself, and I always wanted to be a vet. That's one area where we've connected a lot, particularly animals. Just he's always talking about the bird. He knows a lot about birds. He seems to just know a lot of fun, like interesting facts, which is one of my, like, all of my friends always make fun of me and my boyfriend all the time that my famous last words are just like, did you know? Because I'm always like, did you know this thing? And he is just like
amazing.
he's full of those things. Like, basically that's because we don't really know what to talk about. He's just like telling me all his fun facts. And every day he messages me, like every single day without fail since he's found out about me. Hi, are you having a good day? Hope you're having a good day. Like every day he'll send me a message.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's awkward, but it's good.
Does your mom know?
Yeah.
And how's that going?
Not great.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, that actually was kind of like, Mum has a turbulent relationship with a lot of people. And I feel like that's something that I've noticed in a lot of the stories that I've been listening to on here. Not all of them, but almost like narcissistic type traits.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people kind of just, So she basically, I told her, we've not had a close relationship over the last few years anyway, but I knew she'd want to know, and I wanted to tell my mum. I was real excited. So the very day that I found out about Peter, I actually called my brother. He's 14, so he still lives at home with Mum. And I knew that if he knows, Mum knows. So I told him, and he was like, oh, my God, Mum, Bonnie found her dad. I heard him like yelling out. He was so excited. So I told Mum and my brother, and of course she was like really happy. But Mum, she loves to insert herself into situations. So I was a bit nervous that she might contact him, and that by this point he didn't know yet. And so I was like to Mum, I was like, oh, like this is his name. Because she was like, who is it? What? Oh my gosh. And she was already while we're on the phone, she was like stalking him on Facebook already. And I was like, oh, like, can you not make sure you just don't contact them or anything yet? Like, I'm just really, I'm just sitting on it for a bit and I don't know what to do yet. And she got so offended that I'd even suggest that she would do that, angry at me that I'd even say, ask her not to, because why would she do that? She's never interfered in my life. And I just had to reiterate, no, it's not. I don't mean anything by it. I don't want anyone to contact them yet. I'm just processing still. But I felt a bit nervous all week that week because Mum does interfere. And as soon as I told my boyfriend when I got home that I told Mum, he was like, why did you tell her? I was like, well, she's my mum and I wanted to share with her and I knew she'd be happy. And I was like, well, okay. I was like, she won't interfere. Surely, this thing is so important that she wouldn't. But all week I was a bit nervous, and I had found out that Peter's brother was going to tell him on Friday when he got home from the mines.
Mm-hmm.
So Mum knew he was finding out on Friday. And also I'd found out a little bit of information that from his family that he'd actually had a long Navy and Army career. They're like, look, we think he's got PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how he'll react. He might be just not believe it and think it's a scam. And they just really wanted to understand exactly everything so they could explain it to him. And they weren't sure about it. So they wanted him to find out from them. And that's what we wanted as well. So I was like, perfect. And if he decides to contact me, he can contact me. Also, I'm nearly, in my 30s. It's not like a teenager or a kid needing dad, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So as the week went on and I knew he was finding out on Friday and then I found out this information, I decided to reiterate to Mum not to, because I was keeping her in the loop with what was happening. She wanted to know everything. So I was keeping her in the loop with some things with what was happening, and I let her know about what I'd learned. And I was like, so we're letting them contact us. Peter can contact me. Please don't, we've agreed that we're not going to contact him. Don't contact him. Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. Good. All agreed. And then on the Friday, when Peter called me, right off the bat, he was like, your mum messaged me yesterday.
Oh.
So I filed that away because I This is my first phone call with my father.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, okay. Yeah, I was really angry because luckily, and I hadn't told Mum this because I actually started getting nervous, his brother had actually told him a day earlier than expected. So we thought he was going to find out on Friday, but he actually told him on Thursday morning. And it was Thursday evening that Mum messaged him, but she had no idea that he knew.
This was, how long ago was this at this point?
Just over a month ago, about a month ago now, almost to the day.
So it's still pretty fresh. Are you and her really speaking or?
No.
Okay.
No. And because she wouldn't even really acknowledge it. So weirdly, because Mum and I haven't had this like close, we used to be so close when I was younger, but we haven't had a really close relationship, the type of relationship where you ask like, oh, what are you up to? Like that sort of stuff. We've not really been talking much in the last year at least, except when I talk to my brother because Mum's obviously around but we don't like reach out to each other. And while I was on the phone call with Peter for the first time, I got a message from Mum. So when I got off the phone, I had a message from her, just being like, oh, hi, how are you going? Like, I'm doing some gardening, just like chit-chatty message, like, oh, I'd love to catch up, like, we should do a call. And I just found out this information that she had, after being told twice not to contact him, contacted him directly behind my back. I was like, I really do want to share with you and talk, but right now I'm really angry and I've just like, I know that what's happened. Peter just told me and I need space and I can't talk right now. And she then sent this big long message kind of like explaining why she did. And I was like, I don't even want to know the explanation. Like, I just want acknowledgement and an apology, really, because like it was just so like her.
What do you hope for with your bio dad? Do you have any hopes or expectations about the relationship?
Well, firstly, I guess I just want it to like stop being awkward.
Yeah.
It's like, it's good. It's not like a negative thing. It's such a weird situation where neither of us really know. That's kind of the biggest thing. And I really want to know, like, my other family members, they've all been so lovely and reached out. My grandfather, he's still alive. He's like 85. And I'd like to get to know him because obviously, like, he's obviously later on in life. But like, I went into it with expectations that probably like maybe I will get nothing out of this. Like, at least I'll know.
Yeah.
And just finding out the first few days, especially, I just felt like this overwhelming sense of peace. Just kind of just knowing. And they sent me photos of my grandmother and I look so much like her. It's really weird. It makes sense, but it's weird at the same time, just seeing this person that I look a lot like.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm so glad that's brought you some peace.
Yeah.
What advice would you offer a parent who might be keeping a DNA surprise from their child? I know that your story is not an NPE story exactly, but your mother did keep a secret from you, for a while, that she wasn't sure who your bio father was.
Being honest and finding out like as much as you can, or like write their name down. Like, I don't know, like that's been the biggest thing. Just like, she knew the name. She even wrote him letters and burned them. And Mum told me when she had me, she thought that, her love would be enough, which that breaks my heart because like, I know that my mum loves me very much. But I just, not knowing has just been so, it makes you, I don't know, I just knowing, I think knowing is just really important, and as much as possible, just being honest.
What advice would you give someone who is searching for their bio dad and doesn't really know who they are?
Keep a spreadsheet. I actually keep a spreadsheet of everything that you've searched for, because when you're looking through all these different people, you start seeing names and you search different names, and it's just so hard to keep track of where everyone connects. And I actually when I found out this guy's last name, it sounded so familiar. And I searched in my mum's messages that I'd sent her. And before I'd even done my DNA test, I'd actually sent her that name and asked if it could be him. And she was like, no, it doesn't ring a bell. But if I had had that, I would have been able to find it easier, I think. Yeah, keeping a spreadsheet and just taking breaks, because I know, at least for me, I felt really burned out a lot of the time. And I probably could have taken some time off work when I found him, actually, because although it's been really positive, it just brings up so much because there's so much behind. It's not just the act of like finding out who your father is. It's the entire kind of like your entire life beforehand. So I feel like I've been like processing everything, and yeah, just give yourself time and compassion as well. Like I've kind of I don't think I really had an option. I felt like my body's just made me take it easy over the last few weeks. So I've been pretty much useless at work.
Well, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to go through. Well, Bonnie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I felt and heard so many similarities to an NPE experience, a DCP experience. I think we're all interconnected with the emotions and things that we go through on this journey. So thank you for sharing. And I hope that your relationship with your bio dad continues to grow.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so too.
Thanks again to Bonnie for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise story that you'd like to share, please email dnasurprises@gmail.com. And if you haven't yet, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Until next time.